CSS Tutorial. Chapter 5. Texts, Fonts, Links, Lists, and Tables. CSS Text. This text is styled with some of the text formatting properties. The heading uses the text align, text transform, and color properties. The paragraph is indented, aligned, and the space between characters is specified. The color property is used to set the color of the text. With CSS, a color is most often specified by a color name, like red, a hex value, like #FF0000, an RGB value, like RGB 255,0,0. The default text color for a page is defined in the body selector. This is an example of CSS text color. The text align property is used to set the horizontal alignment of a text. A text can be left or right aligned, centered, or justified. The following example shows center aligned and left and right aligned text. Left alignment is default if text direction is left to right, and right alignment is default if text direction is right to left. The text align property used by horizontal alignment for a text the left, right, and center. The text align justify is the value stretches of the line, that each line had an equal width. When the text align property is set to justify, each line is stretched so that every line has equal width, and the left and right margins are straight, like in magazines and newspapers. The text decoration property is used to set or remove decorations from text. The value text decoration, none, is often used to remove underlines from links. An example of a link with no underline, google.com. The other text decoration values are used to decorate text. Note: it is not recommended to underline text that is not a link, as this often confuses the reader. The text transform property is used to specify uppercase and lowercase letters in a text. It can be used to turn everything into uppercase or lowercase letters, or capitalize the first letter of each word. This is an example of text transformation. The text indent property is used to specify the indentation of the first line of a text. An example of text indent property. The letter spacing property is used to specify the space between the characters in a text. The following example demonstrates how to increase or decrease the space between characters. An example of letter spacing property. The line height property is used to specify the space between lines. An example of line height property. The direction property is used to change the text direction of an element. An example of text direction property. The word spacing property is used to specify the space between the words in a text. The following example demonstrates how to increase or decrease the space between words. An example of word spacing property. Disable text wrapping inside an element. This example demonstrates how to disable text wrapping inside an element. Different examples of text wrapping. This is an example of text shadow effect. CSS fonts. The CSS font properties define the font family, boldness, size, and the style of a text. Notice the difference between serif and sans serif fonts. CSS font families. In CSS, there are two types of font family names. Generic family, a group of font families with a similar look, like serif or monospace. Font family. A specific font family, like Times New Roman or Arial. Note: on computer screens, sans serif fonts are considered easier to read than serif fonts. The font family of a text is set with the font family property. The font family property should hold several font names as a fallback system. If the browser does not support the first font, it tries the next font, and so on. Start with the font you want, and end with a generic family, to let the browser pick a similar font in the generic family, if no other fonts are available. Note: if the name of a font family is more than one word, it must be in quotation marks, like Times New Roman. More than one font family is specified in a comma-separated list. An example of font family. The font style property is mostly used to specify italic text. This property has three values. Normal. The text is shown normally. Italic. The text is shown in italics. Oblique. The text is leaning. Oblique is very similar to italic, but less supported. Examples of font style property. The font size property sets the size of the text. Being able to manage the text size is important in web design. However, you should not use font size adjustments to make paragraphs look like headings, or headings look like paragraphs. Always use the proper HTML tags, like H1 to H6 for headings and P for paragraphs. The font size value can be an absolute, or relative size. Absolute size sets the text to a specified size. Does not allow a user to change the text size in all browsers, bad for accessibility reasons. Absolute size is useful when the physical size of the output is known. Relative size sets the size relative to surrounding elements. Allows a user to change the text size in browsers. Note: if you do not specify a font size, the default size for normal text, like paragraphs, is 16 pixels, where 16 pixels is equal to 1 em. An example of set font size with pixels. To allow users to resize the text, in the browser menu, many developers use em instead of pixels. 1 em is equal to the current font size. The default text size in browsers is 16 pixels. So, the default size of 1 em is 16 pixels. The size can be calculated from pixels to em using this formula. Pixels divided by 16 is equals to em. An example of setting font size using em. The solution that works in all browsers is to set a default font size in % for the body element. This is an example of using a combination of % and em. The font weight property specifies the weight of a font. This is an example of font weight. The font variant property specifies whether or not a text should be displayed in a small caps font. In a small caps font, all lowercase letters are converted to uppercase letters. However, the converted uppercase letters appears in a smaller font size than the original uppercase letters in the text. An example of font variant. CSS links. With CSS, links can be styled in different ways. Links can be styled with any CSS property, for example color, font family, background, etc. Example of a styling links. In addition, links can be styled differently depending on what state they are in. The 4 links states are: a link, a normal, unvisited link, a visited, a link the user has visited, a hover, a link when the user mouses over it, a active, a link the moment it is clicked. When setting the style for several link states, there are some order rules. A hover must come after a.link and a.visited. A active must come after a dot hover. Example of a link state. Each of these are states of the link. The text decoration property is mostly used to remove underlines from links. The background color property can be used to specify a background color for links. Example of background color property for links. This example demonstrates a more advanced example where we combine several CSS properties to display links as boxes/buttons. Another example of how to create link boxes/buttons. CSS lists. An example of CSS list. In HTML, there are two main types of lists. Unordered lists as UL. The list items are marked with bullets. Ordered lists as OL. The list items are marked with numbers or letters. The CSS list properties allow you to set different list item markers for ordered lists. Set different list item markers for unordered lists. Set an image as the list item marker. Add background colors to lists and list items. The list style type property specifies the type of list item marker. Note: some of the values are for unordered lists, and some for ordered lists. The following example shows some of the available list item markers. An example of list item marks. The list style image property specifies an image as the list item marker. The list style position property specifies whether the list item markers should appear inside or outside the content flow. The list style property is a shorthand property. It is used to set all the list properties in one declaration. When using the shorthand property, the order of the property values are: list style type. If a list style image is specified, the value of this property will be displayed if the image for some reason cannot be displayed. List style position specifies whether the list item markers should appear inside or outside the content flow. List style image specifies an image as the list item marker. If one of the property values above are missing, the default value for the missing property will be inserted, if any. We can also style lists with colors, to make them look a little more interesting. Anything added to the OL or UL tag affects the entire list, while properties added to the LI tag will affect the individual list items. Example of styling list with color. CSS tables. The look of an HTML table can be greatly improved with CSS. To specify table borders in CSS, use the border property. The example below specifies a black border for table, TH, and TD elements. Example of black border for table. The border collapse property sets whether the table borders should be collapsed into a single border. If you only want a border around the table, only specify the border property for table. Width and height of a table are defined by the width and height properties. The example sets the width of the table to 50%, and the height of the TH elements to 60 pixels. An example of table width and height properties. You can set the color of the four borders. This example demonstrates how to set the color of the four borders. It can have from 1 to 4 colors. Note: the border color property does not work if it is used alone. Use the border style property to set the borders first. Example of horizontal alignment. Text align property. This property contains of horizontal alignment the left, right or center for the content of th or td. The vertical align property sets the vertical alignment, like top, bottom, or middle, of the content in th or td. By default, the vertical alignment of the content in a table is middle, for both th and td elements. The following example sets the vertical text alignment to bottom for td elements. Example of vertical alignment. The vertical align property. This property contains a vertical alignment the top, bottom, or middle for the content of th or td. To control the space between the border and the content in a table, use the padding property on td and th elements. Example of table padding. Padding property. This property adds space between the border and the content in a table. Add the border bottom property to th and td for horizontal dividers. Example of horizontal dividers. Bordered table dividers. Add the border bottom property to th and td for horizontal dividers. Use the hover selector on tr to highlight table rows on mouse over. Example of hoverable table. The cursor is hold pointed on some row on the table. For zebra stripe tables, use the nth child selector and add a background color to all even, or odd, table rows. Example of striped tables. The text decoration property is used to set or remove decorations from text. The value text decoration, none, is often used to remove underlines from links. The look of an HTML table can be greatly improved with CSS. Example of hoverable table. Colored table header. A responsive table will display a horizontal scroll bar if the screen is too small to display the full content. Add a container element, like div, with overflow x auto around the table tag element to make it responsive. Example of responsive table. Responsive table. A responsive table more repetition and vertical space needed, but it fits within the horizontal space, so only natural vertical scrolling is needed to explore the data. To create a responsive table, add a container elements, like div, with overflow x auto around the table element.